Welcome back to The Daily. Niall Paterson here, and we are off to Westminster. The departure of Sue Gray, Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, his most senior advisor, essentially, has once again shone a spotlight on special advisors, as well as, of course, being deeply embarrassing this side of his first 100 days. So what exactly is a special advisor? Importantly, they are appointed by politicians rather than being members of the civil service, and they fulfil a variety of functions. Sources close to Ms Gray suggest she was forced out by a bunch of out-of-control special advisors, which rather suggests a level of Machiavellian cunning. Others will remember the BBC series The Thick of It, a political satire, which portrayed them rather more as hapless, feckless fans of profanity. And the truth, no doubt, lies somewhere between the two. But what's obvious is that they do wield considerable power without an awful lot of accountability. In a while, we'll speak to one former advisor to the Northern Ireland Secretary about what the job is actually like. But let's start with Sam Coates, our Deputy Political Editor. Sam, good to see you, mate. So what is a special advisor, or in the terminology that people often use around Westminster, what exactly is a SpAD?
So there are political advisors who are funded by the taxpayer, and each cabinet minister typically has 2 or 3 of them. And they are like second brains for a member of the cabinet. Now, a cabinet minister runs a gigantic Whitehall department, typically, but everybody else that surrounds them, other than fellow ministers, will be civil servants, people who are theoretically neutral. They don't support one political party. Instead, what they do is support the work of a minister and, under the direction of ministers and cabinet ministers, fulfil the orders that they give. But they don't do so in, for instance, support of the goals of the Labour Party. So there is a tiny coterie of people around cabinet ministers who do that instead. And they range from almost kind of handmaiden and helper and personal assistant and gatekeeper through to a policy eyes and ears to make sure that whatever comes out of the civil service is a sort of fit for purpose politically and that matches what the minister wants, through to somebody who will have conversations with special advisors from other departments in order to help grease the wheels of those relationships, through to general problem solver and media manager. So the different range of roles is vast for special advisors. The pay can be anything from about 40 to about, for those who are in Downing Street, famously Sue Gray, who recently left Keir Starmer's side, up at the 170,000 mark. But they're essentially a small network of people that are avowedly political rather than simply the kind of day-to-day civil management of their government department.
So how powerful are special advisors then, Sam, when it comes to the machinery of government? I mean, I think back to Dominic Cummings ended up, of course, as Chief of Staff to Boris Johnson, but I remember him when he was working as a special advisor at the Department for Education, and, you know, he did his master's bidding, but he was also working for himself, it appeared at times.
Formally, the entire authority of an advisor rests only on the agreement and cooperation of the cabinet minister that they serve. Special advisors don't really have any intrinsic power to tell the civil service what to do, to commission policy, or anything like that. But formal rules is not the way that Whitehall likes to work.
Of course not.
And in most cases, the cabinet minister's consent is simply assumed, meaning that actually special advisors can do a lot of those things. It depends on the character of the cabinet minister and the character of the advisor. But providing the two trust each other, the scope of the advisor is actually pretty wide-ranging, and they can have a say on everything that they're formally not meant to do, from appointments through to policy. And then they can go one step further. Special advisors also get sight of all sorts of confidential government material that would be fascinating to the likes of you and me, and that we would very much like to get our hands on, and might either help or hinder some of their cabinet ministers, maybe government rivals.
Doesn't that suggest, though, that this system of special advisors, Sam, is pretty dangerous, where there isn't some central figure, chief of staff or something like that, you know, running the show, the political landscape at the moment? You have a bunch of people who haven't been in government for a decade and a half. I suspect another useful aspect of the people that you can bring into these roles is they can bring experience in government that you might not have.
That's right. That was kind of the idea behind Keir Starmer's appointment of Sue Gray. She did have lots of Whitehall experience. He appointed her as a special advisor, but also as somebody who understood the way that Whitehall worked in order to teach people the lessons of how to use the system, the Whitehall system, and how not to. And in this extraordinary period after her departure, one set of claims is that in the end, the reason that she had to go was, in the view of some, and I'm sure she would contest this, that is the thing that she turned out just not to be very good at. Whether it was trying to get the right people in the right jobs, which fell foul of the process, a process that she was meant to understand, whether it was using political antennae to work out how to get on with people, whether it was sorting out advisors and their jobs and their pay. Clearly, she ended up rubbing up fellow special advisors up the wrong way and sort of lost the support of bits of that network. In a way that I think just made everything very fractious in the opening 100 days of this government.
So, new Chief of Staff has been brought in, Morgan McSweeney. How's he going to run the show?
So, during the election campaign, he was highly regarded because, not least, he managed to take Labour to a stonking landslide majority. And that had Morgan at the centre of operations, drawing on his kind of 25-year experience as somebody who is good at organising and campaigning, and to a certain degree, policy that helps those objectives. However, it is not automatic that somebody with those skills will make an excellent Chief of Staff, because it's a slightly different skill set. It's a skill set that involves being gatekeeper to the Prime Minister, filtering some of the stuff that gets to the Prime Minister, working out the Prime Minister's priorities, working out what the Prime Minister is going to hear, and sort of really is quite a powerful role just shaping what goes through the machine and reaches the top. So we wait to see whether Morgan can do it.
We'll be back in a moment when I'll be talking to one former special advisor. Welcome back. With the resignation of Sue Gray still reverberating around Westminster and the suggestion that out-of-control special advisors were ultimately responsible, it is probably about time we actually spoke to someone who did the job. Peter Cardwell worked for a number of senior Conservative politicians and has written the book, The Secret Life of Special Advisors. Peter, good to see you. Look, something that's always puzzled me, particularly given that you and I used to work together in Sky's political unit down in Westminster, is how one becomes a special advisor. How does the poacher turn gamekeeper?
Well, like a lot of political roles and a lot of political promotions, there's sort of no rhyme or reason to it, and it's also not very fair in many ways. But essentially, it's appointed, and you need to have some sort of personal relationship, either with the person who is recruiting those people or the person who will be your boss. The way it worked with me was I knew the Chief of Staff through my work at Sky and other broadcasters, actually, Fiona Hill, who ended up as Theresa May's Chief of Staff, and she asked me to work for the Northern Ireland office with James Brokenshire, who was my minister I worked for the most of the time, and that's kind of how it worked. But I mean, the strangest job interview I've ever had, which was literally an email exchange with Fiona and then a gin and tonic at the Corinthia Hotel, a hotel in Westminster, with James Brokenshire. So it was not conventional by any means.
I won't ask who picked up the tab. but no, I presume though, Peter, you know, coming straight from journalism, you enter into government as a special advisor. There's no manual that they hand you on day one, is there? So what was your first day like? Did you have your packed lunch, your apple?
It was very strange. And the thing is, I think as a journalist, because I'd interacted with a lot of special advisors, including Fiona Hill, who I mentioned, I thought I knew what it was. I thought I knew what the job was, but really I didn't. The policy, especially the 4 different departments I worked in, it sort of hit me like a freight train. The 2 things that you can bring to the role, as I learned very quickly, were influence with number 10 and speaking with your minister's voice. And if you don't have those 2 qualities, and if you don't get them very quickly from sort of day one, essentially, well, actually, you're not going to be a very good special advisor. You may as well just be another civil servant.
I mean, is there such a thing as a typical day for a SpAD, Peter? And if so, just walk me through it.
Yeah, I suppose there is actually. We generally started either in the House of Commons office or in the office in the department, which is just 10-minute walk away in Whitehall, with a sort of 9 a.m. meeting, going through the papers. But most of the time, I would have spoken to the Secretary of State before that. He would be the first person I'd speak to in the morning, usually the last person I'd speak to at night. I'd ring him sort of on the way to the tube. We'd have a meeting with officials, including the private office, which are the people who kind of run the Secretary of State's life. For about half an hour, we'd have a bit of SpAD time. There are three, at that stage, special advisors. We talk through the political issues of the day as opposed to the more general civil service issues. And then there'd be meetings, media appearances, events to attend, sometimes obviously parliamentary questions that we prepare for. It's an absolutely packed day. Some days it would be fine. You'd clock off at 6 o'clock and see friends, have a bit of a life. But most of the time it was there was something in the evening. And I mean, I have had the perhaps not particularly pleasant experience of being on the phone to journalists, usually with the BBC Today programme at sort of 1:45 in the morning, and then have to get up at 5 o'clock the next morning and do the morning round. And there was one stage during Brexit we did 14 interviews in 2 hours.
Wow.
And that was because all the London national broadcasters and the Dublin broadcasters and the Belfast broadcasters all wanted an interview. So that was sometimes a bit strange.
I wonder to what extent there exists, practical problems arising from tensions between individuals like yourself, the special advisors, and the civil servants. The civil servants who, let's not forget, have probably been in that department for an awful lot longer than you or even the minister.
And they'll be there after you as well. Yeah, look, there's a Venn diagram, I think, between what the civil service wants and what the political team, the Secretary of State and the special advisors want. And really, I remember sitting in meetings saying, right, we've got to do this now to senior civil servants. And they said, well, in 4 years' time, this is going to cause serious financial problems for the department. And I mean, I literally said, I don't care. I won't be here. And this guy said, yes, but I do, because I will. And that sort of typifies the problem that's there. There are also, I mean, you cannot underestimate how much the civil service is political as well, with a small p. They're not party political by any stretch of the imagination. I very much admire the civil service. Most civil servants were fine, but occasionally I did use a few sort of Malcolm Tucker lines from the thick of it.
As you well know, mate, I, being Scottish and into politics and someone who has a television, can quote you every single Malcolm Tucker line, including the ones that they cut out because they were far too rude. But is that true? I mean, for those who haven't watched it, the thick of it was a BBC satire, Armando Iannucci, about, working in government, a minister surrounded by their special advisors and the civil service there at the same time. And when I think back on that series, the things that leap off the screen to me are the dysfunction, the bitterness, the backbiting, the fighting that takes place across government because you all have your own individual strategic priorities and they don't necessarily mesh together. I mean, was it really that close to reality?
In terms of how realistic the thick of it is, it's a bit like saying, EastEnders is a version of what it's like living in a square in the east of London, but it's perhaps not exactly. It's perhaps a bit exaggerated. But I mean, look, it was amusing and very, very good, and picked up a lot of the elements of it, but not exactly quite the same. Usually a lot calmer. Sometimes it is just sitting in meetings talking about policy. But the most sort of thick of it day that I had was I briefed a story to the Evening Standard, and their deadline at that stage was sort of mid-morning. Number 10 changed their mind, and the story was wrong, but about to go in the Evening Standard. And then before the Evening Standard hit the streets, Number 10 changed their mind again and were fine with the story. So, I mean, the journalists didn't know anything about it. They'd faithfully, taken my briefing and asked the opposition and written the story. But that was one of those days where it was just like, I could lose my job today. Oh, no, they've changed their mind. It's fine.
How important is that you have not just a close working relationship with your minister, but more than that, a friendship? Because, at times, individuals like yourselves are called to go out and firefight for their man or their women. And I'm thinking when it comes to James Brokenshire, a story that some listeners may remember. How many ovens was it that James had in his kitchen?
I will maintain to my dying day that there were 2 double ovens. Most people say there are 4 ovens, but they're wrong.
I remember having so much fun with this story myself, actually. Remind us what happened.
Well, we'd done a very good interview with the Sunday Times, and he talked about his father dying and all these sorts of the aspects of home, and he was the housing secretary at the time. And no one will remember any of that interview. The only thing they'll ever remember is the fact that James has multiple ovens. And that became 8 days of my life. And I just remember, I mean, it wasn't
So sorry.
it wasn't the hardest thing I had to do, but it was probably the most frustrating by the end of it. But yeah, I mean, in a more serious note, you do sometimes you have to really bat for your person, and I think that you've got to be very loyal, and I think that it can be very difficult as well, especially if there's a government policy you disagree with, and your job is to kind of sell it. But that's part of the job, this kind of collective responsibility sort of idea. But yeah, it's helpful to admire your minister, and I do know some people who didn't.
Cast your eye over what is happening inside Downing Street at the moment and the departure of Sue Gray as Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff. I mean, look, the Conservatives have been there themselves before. Let's not forget, Theresa May losing the majority comes in, and within a handful of days, in fact, I think, her two Chiefs of Staff, Fiona Hill and Nick Timothy, were on their way to the Downing Street gate. So there is form for this on both sides of the political divide, but it doesn't look good.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And when the advisor becomes the story, as was the case with Nick and Fee, as you mentioned there, it was the case with Dominic Cummings, it was the case with Alistair Campbell, and then it became the case with Sue Gray. But really with Sue Gray, she was very well known in Whitehall before she switched. The Partygate report made her incredibly well known nationally. And then she moved from an impartial civil service role to a party political role as an advisor in opposition to Keir Starmer. Then she became Chief of Staff, and only lasted 13 weeks. There's a lot of chaos there. I mean, I know Sue Gray a bit. I worked with her. I never had a problem with her, but she's someone who definitely elicits very strong emotions with people. She's very decisive, a formidable person, to an extent, a woman in a man's world. And actually, it just wasn't working. And the thing is, she had become the story. And she said in her statement that what happened with her risks becoming a distraction. Well, it was a distraction. In the end, it didn't work because she wasn't political enough. And also, she had a lot of enemies for whatever reason.
Peter Cardwell, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for all your insight.
Thanks, Neil.
Just one final thought from Sam Coates, however. And Sam, look, special advisors, a job for which there's no job description, plenty of power, but little accountability. To the extent, as we've just been hearing, they themselves can become the story. Seriously, does politics really need them?
Implicit in your question, Neil, is that the idea that politics is in some way bad and sort of governing is good, right? That the people that do the politics are in some way grubby and nefarious and are a problem in the system.
Yep.
I would start by turning this on its head. A cabinet minister is expected to be across everything in their department, and when they do media rounds, every subject that the government might have something thrown at, and try to align policy goals with political campaigns, with trying to work out, what you do with other departments to please number 10, matched with maybe just a little bit of personal ambition as well. That is too much for one individual to do. They need help. Maybe the question is there enough political help? If you have a tiny team always struggling to keep up, always struggling to sort of work out what the political implications of the civil service policy brief are, always trying to work out what's going on in other departments so your minister doesn't look like a fool when they go on the media, that's when mistakes are made, when balls are dropped, when people start shouting at you, where the wrong thing comes out in the media. I think my question is, in other systems, politics is embedded far more deeply than in the British one. In America, there are hundreds of political appointees in every government, in federal department. In fact, political appointees are the norm rather than the exception there. And I think it's that. I think there's a genuine question whether or not the problem with special advisors is simply that they're too small a number of them and the people trying to meld are just not numerous enough.
And of course, for up-to-the-minute news on what is happening in Westminster, just head to the Politics Hub on skynews.com. You can get in touch with the podcast, Sky News Daily at sky.uk. You can hit me up on social media at Sky News Neil. But that's your lot for today. We're back again tomorrow.